Siblings compete for their father's fortune, driven by jealousy, only to discover it's all a test. The candlelit hall of Ravenshade Manor stood in eerie silence as the last breath escaped Elias Morven's lips. A titan of industry, feared and admired, Elias left behind a legacy as vast as it was mysterious. But more importantly, he left behind 3 children, each with their own hidden agendas. Calder, the eldest, was ambitious and calculating. He saw the empire as his birthright. Ivora, the middle child, was cold and cerebral, with a mind sharpened by years in law and finance. Then there was Silas, the youngest, an outsider who had turned his back on the family, only returning after years abroad. The funeral was somber, yet each sibling's eyes lingered not on the casket, but on the heavy mahogany briefcase held by the family lawyer, Lennox Vane. Inside it, they knew, lay the will, Elias's final word on who would inherit his empire. But what none of them expected was that Elias had not left behind instructions. He had left behind a game, a deadly one. The air grew thick as Lennox Vane opened the briefcase. The siblings leaned forward like predators scenting blood. But instead of a straightforward will, Lennox retrieved a stack of letters, each sealed with Elias's insignia. A serpent devouring its own tail. "There is no traditional will," Lennox announced. "Instead, your father devised a challenge. You each have a letter, and each letter contains a task. Completion of these tasks will determine the sole heir to the Morven estate." The room erupted. "This is madness," Ivora snapped, her voice barely concealing panic. "He's treating our lives like a game," Calder smirked. "He always loved watching us tear each other apart." Silas remained silent, staring at his envelope as if it might burn him. His father had never forgiven him for leaving. "Why invite him back now?" Lennox continued. "The estate will remain sealed. Only one of you will inherit. The others will walk away with nothing. If any of you fail to complete your task or interfere with another, you forfeit everything." The stakes had never been higher. The Morven legacy, worth hundreds of millions, now depended not on blood but on cunning, and the game had just begun. Each sibling retreated to their quarters with trembling hands and poisoned thoughts. Alone, Silas broke the seal on his envelope. Inside was a single line of text. "Find the one who suffered for your silence." He stared, confused. What silence, what suffering? In her wing, Ivora read her own task. "Return what was taken under oath." She paled. Her hands trembled as memories long buried resurfaced, ones she'd locked away during her ruthless climb through the legal world. Calder's letter was simpler. "Destroy the lie that built your name," he scoffed. "He really expects me to confess," he muttered. But the shadows in his eyes said he knew exactly what the task referred to. All 3 were being forced to confront the very things they'd worked their entire lives to bury. And worse, they knew their father well enough to realize failure would not go unpunished. Elias Morven had always been a man who believed in consequences. The estate was vast, its stone walls hiding years of secrets. Somewhere within them, each sibling's truth waited like a trap ready to snap. And the game had no referee. Silas's first step was to leave the manor. His father's words haunted him. "The one who suffered for your silence." The phrase drew him to a dusty corner of his past he had tried to forget. He drove for hours to the outskirts of Greymore, a decaying town once owned by Morven Industries. There, decades ago, a factory fire had taken the lives of 6 workers. It had been hushed quickly. Silas, just 17 then, had overheard his father arguing with a foreman. A girl, no older than him, had tried to report safety violations. Days later, the fire happened. She had come to him, begged him to speak. But he hadn't. He had been scared. He had stayed silent. Her name was Elira Moss, and now he had to find what remained of her. In Greymoor's cemetery, he found her name etched in stone, flowers long wilted. Guilt clamped down on him like ice. He would make this right, somehow. But watching from a nearby car, a man in a black coat dialed a number and whispered, "He's found the grave." What now? The game was more than a test. Someone was pulling strings. Back at Ravenshade Manor, Ivora stood in the estate's ancient library. Dust coated the shelves like ash. Her task had brought her here. Return what was taken under oath. Years ago, she had lied under oath in a court case involving a client accused of embezzlement. She hadn't known the full story then, but when she learned the truth, after her firm made millions from the case, she stayed silent. But her father had known. Of course he had. Inside the vault hidden behind one of the shelves, she found a folder with the Morven crest and her name scrawled across it. Inside was a transcript of the trial, marked and highlighted. A copy of her forged notes, proof she'd perjured herself. At the bottom was a note from Elias. "Confess or be exposed. The choice is yours." Ivora's pulse pounded. She could lose her law license, her firm, everything. But what terrified her more was the idea that her brothers might get to the end of this game before her. She had worked too hard to lose it all now. She picked up the folder and set it aflame, but the fireplace camera blinked red, watching, recording. Calder stood before the portrait gallery, his father's eyes glaring down at him from a gilded frame. Elias had always known Calder's biggest secret, the one that built his entire reputation. At 25, Calder had taken credit for a revolutionary AI developed by a research assistant in one of Morven's subsidiaries. That assistant, Luca Varn, had died in a suspicious lab fire. The product made Calder a billionaire, a visionary, but it wasn't his, and now Elias wanted that lie destroyed. Calder returned to the lab's ruins, now a condemned building surrounded by weeds and silence. He broke through the boarded entrance and made his way to the charred remains of the server room. There, hidden beneath the floor, was a safe. Inside was a USB drive labeled Luca's Work Original. A note beneath it read, "Credit or consequence." Calder slipped the drive into his coat pocket, jaw clenched. No one could ever see this. If the truth came out, his entire empire would crumble. He turned to leave, but didn't notice the security drone hovering silently in the rafters. Elias's game wasn't just about choices, it was about being watched and judged. Back at Ravenshade Manor, the storm outside mirrored the tension brewing within. The siblings crossed paths only briefly in the long candlelit corridors, their exchanges cold, civil, strategic. Each one harbored secrets, and each one knew the others were hiding something just as damning. What they didn't yet realize was that the entire estate was under surveillance. Elias had installed hidden cameras, voice recorders, even biometric trackers. Every move they made, every lie they told, was being logged by a system only he could have dreamed up. In the control room, buried deep beneath the West Wing, Lennox Vane reviewed the footage. He was no longer just a lawyer. He was the executor of a psychological war. One feed showed Ivora burning her evidence. Another displayed Calder stashing Luca's drive in a hidden compartment behind a painting. And Silas, still away, was being tracked by Elias's private investigator. Lennox wasn't alone. A woman sat in the shadows beside him, arms crossed, face half lit. "Are they cracking?" she asked. "They're playing right into his hands," Lennox replied. The woman smirked. "Then the real game is about to begin." Not all players had names in the will. Some had been left out on purpose. Silas found himself outside a crumbling house on the edge of Greymore. It was Elira's childhood home, abandoned now, windows shattered, weeds tall and aggressive. Inside, dust-covered furniture whispered stories long past, and the floor creaked with every step. On a desk in the back room he found what he didn't know he was looking for. A journal. Elira had kept meticulous notes of the violations at the Morven plant. The journal named names, dated inspections, mentioned threats, and at the end, in shaking handwriting, a single line, "I told him everything. He promised to help me." Silas dropped the book. He had lied to himself all these years, convincing himself that his silence hadn't mattered, but it had, and his father knew it. He took the journal and left the house, but as he stepped outside, a man in a hooded coat stepped from the trees, blocking his path. "You shouldn't be digging," the man growled. Silas stepped back, heart racing. "Who are you?" "Someone who knows how this game ends." Then the man disappeared into the woods, vanishing as quickly as he had come. It was no longer just about inheritance. It was about truth and survival. Calder returned to the manor that night, soaked from rain, eyes hollow. The weight of the USB drive in his pocket felt like a ticking bomb. He poured himself a drink in the study and found Ivora already there, seated by the fire. She didn't speak. She just watched him. Finally he said, "I know you burned something." Her eyebrow twitched. "And you didn't." A tense silence followed. Then Calder made a proposition. "We work together. Neutralize Silas. Once he's out, it's just you and me." Ivora gave a humorless laugh. "You assume I trust you. You don't have to. Just trust that I want to win more than I want to see you lose." She stared at him for a long moment, then extended her hand. "One move. If it fails, we're done." Calder shook it. Their alliance was forged in shadows and self-preservation. But alliances made in desperation never hold, especially when both sides are waiting to strike first. Unbeknownst to them, Lennox Vane was watching, recording, uploading their whispered pact to a secure archive. Elias had foreseen even this. He had designed the game to punish not only failure but betrayal. Ivora returned to her suite, her thoughts racing. Working with Calder was dangerous, but being blindsided by him was worse. She opened her closet and reached behind a false panel to retrieve a box she hadn't touched in 10 years. Inside were letters, hundreds of them, from a girl named Nerys. Nerys was Elias's illegitimate daughter. Ivora had discovered her existence during law school. The letters were filled with longing, pain, and the desperate desire to be acknowledged by her father. Ivora had destroyed her father's chance at reconciliation by never telling anyone about the girl. Nerys had died in a car accident a year later. No one from the Morven family ever knew she existed, until now. Taped to the bottom of the final letter was a thumb drive labeled, "Your real sister's voice." Ivora's hands shook as she plugged it into her laptop. A video played. Nerys, pale and frail, spoke into the camera. "If you're watching this, someone finally opened the box. I never wanted revenge, I just wanted to be seen. Tell him I forgave him, please." Ivora wiped a tear. But Elias never got the message, and perhaps she would now be the one seeking forgiveness. Silas returned to Ravenshade Manor with Elira's journal pressed to his chest like a talisman. He knew it now. Elias hadn't just wanted him to face his guilt, he had wanted him to reveal the truth the family buried. The moment he stepped inside, Lennox was waiting. "You found something," the lawyer said without a trace of surprise. Silas nodded. "A record of everything. She was trying to protect the workers. They punished her for it." Lennox's expression remained unreadable. "Your father expected you to bring it back. What you do with it now determines your place in this family." "What if I don't want a place?" Silas asked. "Then this ends with you walking away again." Silas left the journal on a table in the great hall in plain sight. But as he walked toward the stairs, he noticed a flicker of movement from the shadows above. Someone had been watching him. And as the rain began again outside, a hand, pale and delicate, slid the journal from the table. The player who retrieved it wasn't Calder. It wasn't Ivora. Someone else had entered the game, and they weren't bound by Elias's rules. The next morning, Ivora wandered into the overgrown garden behind the manor. Elias used to sit here in silence for hours, pruning the roses with surgeon-like precision. Now the thorns had reclaimed the paths, and the marble statues were chipped and moss-covered. She found Silas there, seated on a broken bench. "You look like you haven't slept," she said. "I haven't, neither have you." For a rare moment there was no venom in their voices, just fatigue, just the weight of their family's sins. Silas broke the silence. "Did you know about the girl, Nerys?" Ivora froze. "Yes," she whispered. "I knew. Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I was afraid she'd take what I couldn't earn." There was no accusation in his stare, only sadness. The Morven children had been raised not to love one another but to outperform, outmaneuver, outlast. Elias hadn't raised heirs, he had forged competitors. Ivora looked at him then, really looked at him, not as a rival but as a brother. "I think we're being watched," she said. Silas nodded slowly. "Then let them watch. For now they were allies, fragile ones. But alliances were short-lived in games designed to destroy." That night Calder paced through the east wing, restless. The shadows seemed thicker than usual. The lights flickered. The portraits on the wall, Morvens from generations past, felt like eyes judging him. He passed by the sealed door to Elias's private study. It had remained locked since the patriarch's death. But Calder noticed something strange, a faint buzzing behind the door, electronic. Following the noise, he pried open a loose panel in the wall. Inside, a hidden passage led down into darkness. He lit his phone and descended carefully. The tunnel curved around and dropped into a cold stone chamber. There, a bank of servers blinked to life at his presence. Dozens of screens, dozens of live feeds. Every room in the manor was under surveillance. Audio, video, thermal. Elias hadn't just planned the game. He had orchestrated it, recording their every confession, every betrayal. On the central screen, Calder saw himself shaking hands with Ivora. On another, Silas leaving the journal. Then, a new screen flickered on, showing a fourth player. A woman. She was walking through the manor in silence. Her face was unfamiliar, but in her hands she held Elira's journal, and she was smiling. The woman moved through the manor like a ghost, tall, with striking eyes and a calm, almost predatory confidence. She wore no identification, no hint of who she was, but she belonged here. She entered Elias's old bedroom and placed the journal on his nightstand. Then she lit a candle and sat beside it, her posture regal. From the secret control room, Lennox watched her and made a call. "She's here," he said. The woman's name was Mira Vale, Elias's protégé, his secret heir, raised in private, trained to observe, calculate, and if needed, intervene. She wasn't mentioned in the will because she wasn't meant to inherit. She was meant to enforce. Mira was the final test. If the siblings failed to complete their tasks truthfully or tried to deceive the system, she would receive everything, the estate, the companies, the legacy. She had been trained for this her whole life. Now, as she flipped through Elira's journal, her expression turned cold. "These people," she whispered to the silence, "don't deserve forgiveness." She stood and headed for the great hall. The test wasn't just about truth anymore. It was about judgment. Calder summoned Ivora to the tower library. He was pale, shaken, and breathing fast. "There's someone else in the house," he said. Ivora blinked. "What do you mean? A woman? She's watching us. She's not part of the game. She is the game." He showed her the hidden tunnel, the surveillance chamber, the footage of Mira. Ivora's face twisted with horror. She's the backup plan, Calder realized. If we fail, she wins. She already has the journal, Ivora muttered. That was when they both panicked. Their pact was over. The only way to win now was to outplay both Silas and Mira. They couldn't trust each other anymore. Calder wanted to release the footage exposing Silas's guilt. Ivora wanted to preemptively confess to spin the narrative. They began shouting, accusing, threatening. Their voices echoed through the halls, carried by hidden mics to Mira, who watched with measured satisfaction. In the end, Calder left first, slamming the door behind him. Ivora stayed behind, staring at the surveillance feed of herself on the screen. She whispered one word under her breath, "Checkmate," but the game wasn't over. The final moves had yet to be played. That evening, Silas stood on the manor's west terrace, watching storm clouds churn in the sky. The estate pulsed with a tension he couldn't shake. As if the building itself held its breath, he had noticed the subtle changes. The lights turning off moments before he entered a room, whispers in empty corridors, footsteps that stopped when he turned. Something was wrong. Returning to the great hall, he found Elira's journal missing. Then she appeared. A woman in a gray coat, standing at the edge of the staircase, holding the journal like a relic. Her expression was composed, but her eyes were full of judgment. "I know who you are," Silas said. "And I know what you did," she replied. "Are you part of this inheritance circus? I am the last move your father made." She descended the stairs. "Elias wanted truth," she continued. "But if none of you could deliver it, he gave me permission to erase you all from the board." Silas clenched his fists. "I didn't come back to fight. I came back to fix what I broke." Mira tilted her head. "Then prove it publicly." And with that, she handed him the journal. The test was still alive, and he had one chance to rewrite history. The next morning, a live feed took over the Morven Corporation homepage. News outlets scrambled as a press conference began. Streamed from the very gates of Ravenshade Manor, Silas stood alone before the cameras. He read from Elira's journal, recounting the abuses, the warnings ignored, the factory fire and his silence. Then he named names, his own. "I could have spoken up, I didn't. She died. That was my sin. And it ends today." He placed the journal in a clear box and handed it to a representative from the Workers' Rights Bureau. It was a bombshell. The media exploded. Headlines screamed betrayal and guilt, but also something unexpected, admiration. Silas didn't run, he took the hit. Back at the manor, Mira watched the live stream and said nothing. But behind her, Lennox stepped forward. "He did it," Lennox said. "He passed." Mira didn't blink. One did. The others, however, had not come clean. Not yet. She walked toward Elias's private vault. The final judgment would be delivered tonight, and it wouldn't be televised. Ivora stood in the gallery, facing a portrait of Elias in his younger years. The expression on his face was eerily similar to Mara's, unreadable, calculating. She knew it was over. The footage of her burning documents, the hidden cameras, the thumb drive from Naris, all had been part of Elias's trap. She had lied too many times to dig her way out now. Behind her, Calder entered, his face flushed with rage. "You saw the stream," he barked. "I did. We're ruined." He handed them a weapon. Ivora turned to him. "Then confess. We both can. You don't get it. I'm not losing everything because of some ghost." But as he turned to leave, they both froze. Mira stood at the end of the hallway, calm, silent. Holding a small box, she extended it. Inside were two identical letters, handwritten by Elias. To Ivora, "The cost of deception is silence. Yours has expired." To Calder, "The lie you built now builds your prison." Then she dropped the letters and turned away. No threats, no instructions, just consequences. Ivora broke first. She collapsed to her knees. Calder stared blankly. The fire Elias lit had consumed them. By dawn, the estate was silent again. The game had ended. Mira summoned Lennox to the vault, where she retrieved the final document, the real will. It was signed, sealed, and dated 5 years ago. Inside, Elias had written not names, but one phrase: "The one who redeems the past shall inherit the future." It was never about power, not money, not empire. It was about facing the darkness, and only Silas had done it. Lennox handed Silas the will later that morning, under the towering arches of the Morven Chapel. His hands trembled. "You're giving me everything?" Silas asked. "No," Lennox replied. "Your father is. I don't want his empire." "Then reshape it." Behind them, Mira watched from a distance. She had no resentment, no bitterness. Her mission was complete, and her presence, like Elias's, would soon become legend. A month later, Ravenshade Manor reopened, this time as a memorial and ethics foundation. Silas sat at Elias's old desk, now cleared of its shadows. A plaque above read, "Let truth inherit." Ivora had quietly surrendered her law license and left the public eye. Calder was facing multiple investigations. and Mira had vanished, leaving only a single message. The game was never about winning, it was about surviving without becoming him. Silas restructured Morven Industries into a trust-driven cooperative, with a board that included workers and community leaders. He didn't seek forgiveness, but he built something that might earn it. In the end, Elias Morven hadn't left behind an inheritance. He had left behind a crucible, and only one of his children had emerged with a soul intact. The cameras were off, the mansion was quiet, but the legacy had changed, not by power, by truth. If you found this story gripping, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more tales of suspense, betrayal, and redemption. The next game is always one decision away.